from the public. Did any requests for adjustments or relief from specific charges?
Nothing from me.
Very good. We'll move on to the consent agenda. And I know Brian is going to ask for number 7 to be pulled and deferred to a later meeting. So given that, do we have any requests to pull any other agenda item from the consent agenda for discussion under the regular agenda? If not, can I have a motion to improve the consent agenda except for item 7?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to item number 9, receive the San Jacinto River Authority report.
Got several folks here today, so Jason's going to talk to you all about the operating report. I'll cover a couple of things that Dan stood up at the end.
Yeah, as far as the operational report, I don't have anything to add. If you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer.
If not, okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, easy enough.
If you all will go to page 33, the water loss year recap report. It is just identifying unaccounted water in the system. And you can see towards the end of the year, it was trending down, which means less loss. And a lot of that can be attributed to your AMI meter system being more accurate in reading and documenting.
And would pipe breaks, things like that factor into this
Yes.
percentage as well? Okay.
And if the district or us had to flush, it would show up in here.
Okay.
And we do flush every year, beginning February. You may have received the notice that we've just started that. I think in your mud.
In our mind,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
And how much does the flush account for? Like, will it be a noticeable amount in the percentage?
Not huge.
Okay.
It might be 1 or 2%. Any questions on the water loss report? I'll mention the update on the infrastructure funding, and then I'll go to the last item that I have. Last time I was visiting with y'all, I mentioned to you that the omnibus bill was passed in December. It did have some funds for Bear Branch Dam, which you all may ultimately end up being a part of at some point. Those funds will be available probably April, May timeframe to the River Authority to help that project along. And then Congressman is still interested in finding other projects in the woods to pursue. So let's go to page 37. Each year, we come to you after the audit has been accomplished. And the audit identifies whether there are some excess funds in our accounts that came from you all. So I'm in the middle of second paragraph. So the excess funds is $370,104. And we have 2 projects that we would like to, normally these funds are moved over to the R&R fund. We're asking for an exception this year because of 2 projects. We had a generator last year to replace the one at Water Plant 5 or Elevated Storage Tank 5. And it's been on order and been on order and been on order and been on order. And so those funds are going to be needed this year to actually pay for the generator. The other item is the need to do a water or a rate study for water and sewer rates. So this is typical of major utilities and municipalities where some may do a rate study on an annual basis and just update information. We have never had a consultant prepare rate analysis done. It's always been in-house within a county. We statement of qualifications from a couple of firms. We have to do a rate study for the groundwater reduction plan every 5 years by contract. Our Lake Conroe division also has to do a rate analysis, mainly for the raw water rates. So the thought was to go ahead and include a rate study for the Woodlands division, which would be the wholesale rates. So that, and the purpose of them is to look at all the expenses, look at all the revenue coming in. The ones that we're pursuing, the rate study we're pursuing will also give us the ability to forecast out 10 years, 15 years. Whereas the simple Excel-based spreadsheet that we have today doesn't allow us to forecast beyond a year. But like I said, this is typical of utility operations. The firm that is going to be, would do the work is Corollo. They've done these before for a number of larger systems. And so we're asking for permission to keep the $370,104 in our general fund, the Woodlands General Fund, to do the generator and the rate study. And it's no action today. We'll be coming back to you in March for full approval.
I think it'll be on the March trustee, not individual funds.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. Okay. And then, so if those funds, if that 370,104 isn't used fully, will then the remainder go into the R&R?
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions?
On the rate study, what's the anticipation that the rate that we currently have is high or low?
Don't know.
Okay.
You know, the way we do the rates now, it's still based on expenses and revenue in and anticipated fixed.
Right.
So it's probably not off at all, but this will, as I mentioned earlier, this will give us the ability to forecast beyond just a year or two.
That's good.
And that will help the MUDs also in forecasting
Yeah.
their
Planning.
expenses.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Any questions? Dan's going to talk to you about the fund project.
I'll go through any other.
Oh, I'm sorry. There is one other item. Dan is reminding me of something that I overlooked. On page 41, Chris and I went to the audit committee back in February, and we talked about budget guidelines. And so on
Right, that's right.
page,
The initial slides in there, like Ken said, this is the presentation that led to the audit committee, kind of really talking about some of the assumptions that are going into our 10-year project planning and budgeting. There's a few things we did want to point out, starting on page 50 there regarding how some of the existing funds are going to be shifted around primarily due to the strategic plan and some projects going away, other things.
So in case of, on page 50, future facilities, there's currently a balance of $4,598,000 plus change. We had an approved project out of those funds on the treatment plant 1 aeration basins. And those are the basins that you saw, basins 1 and 2, that are out of service. We've been kind of, that project's on hold, waiting on the outcome of the strategic plan. So we're proposing to leave those funds in there. And then take the 4.598 and apply it to elevated storage tank number 6. We think the cost of that is going to be somewhere between $5 and $7 million. Elevated storage tank number 6 would go on Research Forest out at the far end of the system. It's something that's needed as more and more build out occurs. So that's the first one. And on future facilities, that's a separate fund. On the R&R fund, we have lift station number 5, force main, essentially 5.3 million, and we have the town center water line at 4.9 million. We're going to need to purchase land with the new treatment plant. And we're going to have the wastewater conveyance land acquisition, wastewater conveyance line acquisition, land acquisition. So we would like to take those monies that are currently assigned to lift station 5 and the town center water line and move those over for the land, because there are a lot of restrictions and limitations on using bond funds for land acquisition. Now, town center water line would go under the bond funds that we still have available.
And lift station 5 is part of that conveyance system that's come out of strategic plan where we would no longer need to replace lift station 5 portion.
It'd be replaced with the gravity line.
Is that the same idea with the aeration basin for 1? We wouldn't need any more because, yeah, okay.
And so if you'll go to page 52. So remaining bond funds as of December 31st was 24.9 million. We're proposing $500,000 for the strategic plan phase 2, which you'll hear a little more about. South Shore gravity main rehabilitation, $12 million. The conveyance design, this is the roughly 15,000 linear feet of gravity sewer line from Plant 1 up to Woodlands Parkway, designed at about 4 million. And the treatment plant 1 replacement design, plant design at about 8.3 million. So that would consume all but 100,000 of the bond funds. So that's what's proposed. Again, that would be put in front of you in front of the trustees in March for approval. Any question?
And I think a piece of that too is that those are just kind of leading into what you're going to see in our 10-year project plan that will be coming in March for our presentation.
Question? All right.
So I'm going to go back to page 35 in your packet. And what this is going to be leading into is item number 10 on your regular agenda. Consider an act on giving direction to y'all's trustee on how to vote regarding path forward for the wastewater strategic plan. So on page 35, this is a high level one pager that at the top, I think we've shared this before, but these are the stakeholder recommendations that were voted on at the final stakeholder meeting for phase 1 strategic plan here. There's 3 recommendations that are coming out of that, which are tied to that action item that we want your approval to move forward with. So, going through those real quickly. First one is a phase 2 for the new wastewater treatment facility that would replace plant 1 adjacent to the existing treatment plant. So that was decided to be a membrane bioreactor plant, MBR plant. That was a technology that stakeholders voted on during those meetings. Y'all have probably heard the alternative 9 thrown around a lot. We've had numerous alternatives. But what we want to do is take that single alternative to build a new plant in 2027 into a phase 2 to really further optimize and right size the capacity of that facility. There is a lot of questions still on what does that capacity need to be built to in 2027. You know, is there certain aspects of that facility that you would build to more of a higher ultimate capacity, like the influent lift stations, headwork screens, et cetera, but really tying into, well, what do we want to build the membrane capacity? Can you set that up to be phased in some way, where it's maybe modules to where we build to 6 MGD in 2027, but have it able to expand in future years down the road. So there is going to be a lot of information that's collected. You know, we're going to be communicating with the developers using the latest, greatest SFDUE data to really help us and consultant develop that right sizing of that. Once that is developed, we can really refine the cost estimates. You know, look at more. What is the layout of this plant going to be? Start doing more quantity takeoffs to really get down to the next level of cost estimating to get more accurate, cost on that, which would lead into another financial assessment to, if we bond fund this, what are we getting at in terms of rate impacts, and being able to come back to y'all with updated rate impact numbers. So that is the big piece of the phase 2, which would be under $500,000, approximately 6 months in duration. That 6 months would not start till anticipated probably mid-April, because we still have to, finalize a work order with the consultant, take that to our March board, and then communicate with the Texas Water Development Board on some approvals, things how that would be part of that 2017 remaining bond funds. I guess questions on that piece of it, that recommendation, before I go on to the other two. The second bullet is regarding the land acquisition. We all may recall, we had, kind of 4 final alternatives that we were evaluating. All those required the same land acquisition. So we would like approval to move forward with that land acquisition process, start getting appraisals, start doing surveys, communicating with those landowners to work towards acquiring the land that would be required to build the new treatment facility east of the existing. The third recommendation is something else that came out of the strategic plan that, was more or less a surprise for us. And we feel there's a lot of additional value in that, in building a new gravity conveyance line from Lift Station 5, a little south of Woodlands Parkway, down to the new treatment facility. So with that piece of it, we would like to start the preliminary engineering, which really the first piece of that is to take the conceptual idea that was in the strategic plan phase 1 and start doing a more detailed route analysis. Look at the flow lines. Is there fatal flaws with this concept that would, make this not feasible? And continue in that approach through the preliminary engineering, survey, geotech, and then looking at what do we need to acquire for land or easements associated with that new conveyance piece. So the flow chart below just kind of goes through more or less what I explained, but this strategic plan is really kind of breaking out into 3 concurrent paths. The land acquisition program, the phase 2 and continuing design and engineering of the plant piece, and then the conveyance piece. So I guess with that, what questions can I help answer?
The land acquisition, its estimated cost is 6 million. On the R&R fund, it's
Yeah.
5 million. Are we just roughly guessing between 5 and 6, or?
And some of that, the 6 million was looking into some parts north of the plant also.
Okay.
Where do we want some additional buffer?
Okay.
So that was more of where the 6 million was, and bringing it down to the 5 million that's shown on that other slide was really more, all right, well, we need to start with a priority of this is where the
Okay.
footprint of the plant is gonna be. So there might be some kind of different priorities on how we approach that land acquisition. Also, we would want to wait to the results of the routing for the conveyance piece, because that conveyance line most likely will be coming in from the north through those other parcels. So let's wait till we get that before we kind of see what we want to acquire in addition. So it's a good point. Others have pointed that out about that.
Makes sense, though.
There's a little discrepancy,
Yeah.
but that's the justification.
Okay.
On the first point and the 2 sub bullets, I know phase 2 is expected to be about 6 months, and I was in the meeting with the stakeholders whenever that was proposed that we look at the two alternatives. If the baseline renewal comes out to be the best option, will we have to go through this process again? Or is there going to be another stakeholder meeting? I don't think it will end up being the best. All the research shows that Alt 9 is going to be the option to go with. I just don't quite understand what the next steps are going to be on those 2 sub bullets.
So in phase 2, we are only looking at alternative now.
Okay.
We're not going back and looking at the baseline renewal and replacement alternative.
Okay.
That was the stakeholder recommendation. To really, let's focus on optimizing alternative 9 with the questions on capacity and that piece of it.
Okay.
But really, we're not going back to the baseline renewal and replacement, which was, all right, we're going to build part of a plant on the new land and keep the conventional plant still operating. And so through the analysis that was done in the strategic plan, that justified that, what they're saying, the greatest perceived value, which, we did a scoring beyond just cost.
Right.
Some of the other value benefits based on the stakeholder input we got there. So that's why we are just going to be focusing an alternative 9 in phase 2.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I remember there were a couple of people that, well, we're looking at the other one. I just want to make sure that we have a defined path moving forward.
Correct.
Well, thank you.
One other thing I do want to point out is there was a handout up here. If you didn't get it, this is a memo from Teresa Nichols, a consultant that has been working on each plan with us. There were some other MUD directors that brought some questions to us regarding MBR technology. Things with, how many manufacturers are out there? How long has this technology been around? Where are they being manufactured? Where is the service? Where's spare parts? Everything associated with that. So I'm not going to go through it in detail. I'll let y'all read it. And feel free to reach out to me if you got additional questions, but I think this is a good memo walking through some of those questions regarding the technology piece, and it's important the decision of going to that. And Sean, I also just want to thank you for sitting in on the stakeholder meetings, and we really appreciate your input. And I hope it's a good.
It was exciting. Look forward to having clean water for everyone's families in the coming decades.
That's all.
If there's no more questions, then I guess we need to consider the motion on.
Item 10.
Consider
Consider an act on giving direction to the trustee for the how to vote on this wastewater strategic plan.
I'd like to make a motion to accept.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you much. Item number 11, receive the attorney's report.
No general items today. I've got a handful of others further on down the agenda, but happy to answer general questions from y'all before we move on to those items.
Item number 12, consider adopting a resolution concerning developed district status. We're going to.
That's the defer item. We're working with LJ to get their backup documentation as to whether each district is developed or developed. Talk about that prior year. So we'll keep that as a carry.
Very good. Item 13, supplemental agenda on the defined area election.
So I'm going to handle this in a little bit different order. I think the calling of the election really should be our last item from this group. So I'm going to start with 14 and then go to 15 and then come back up to 13.
Okay.
So this, all these items, 13, 14, 15, all relate to the property, the 153 roughly acres that the district annexed back in, I guess it was November, once we received consent from the city of Conroe. So we talked about back then, the plan for this property was to have a defined area created since post annexation, the district is in excess of 1,000 acres. And so you can create a defined area. The legislature changed the minimum acreage of the district a few sessions back from 2,000 to 1,000 acres in order to be able to create a defined area. The defined area, as we talked about before, will allow for the area to basically pay for its own growth, as opposed to having the other taxpayers in MUD 39 pay for the infrastructure that's necessary to serve it. So it will have, assuming that the election successfully passes, it'll have its own tax rate that will be in addition to the underlying MUD 39 tax rate. And the district will issue bonds based on authority that would be approved at the defined area election this May. And the taxes to pay the debt service on those bonds will only be paid by the taxpayers within that defined area. So that's what each of these items relate to. We're going through the legal steps to be able to make that happen. So the first one is to review the preliminary plan of improvements and the bond authorization requirements for defined area A. Just use generic defined area A is what this is called. So that's a document that LJA prepared. We have gone over it in quite a bit of detail. Mike is here with LJA to answer any questions y'all may have. The document is a bit technical in nature. It goes through and says, what infrastructure is expected to be necessary, on-site and off-site water lines, sewer lines, lift station, force main, detention basin, things like that. There's an estimate of what the costs would be for that infrastructure, and then those costs were worked into a bond authorization amount that included contingencies as well as inflation factors, which is typical for these types of bond elections, because the time for when bonds are ultimately issued is really a factor of the pace of development. If they go out there and everything sells like hotcakes, when you could be selling bonds in a few years and your infrastructure costs are locked in, and there's not a whole lot of inflation swag in there. If things were to move, unusually slow, which doesn't usually happen up here, but if it did, then there could be more inflation costs that would go into the infrastructure and would make the bond issuance costs, the bond issues larger to account for those larger infrastructure costs. But again, the size of the bond issue is going to be based on the amount of value that the developer creates on that property that's been annexed. So the bond authorization amount that's been determined by LJA is with the inflation factors and contingencies is 44.8 million. And then we've also done a dollar for dollar refunding authorization, in case the bonds are issued at, say, 6%, and then rates go down, you can refinance it for. We did it dollar for dollar. Now, in reality, under the laws of the state of Texas, you get par for par. So only to the extent the bond amount of the refunding is higher than the refunded, you're using authorization. So the reality of you using that much refunding is very remote, but we're just trying to keep it simple. So that's the bond authorization amount and the refunding bond amount. And that's pretty much a 10-cent tour of the preliminary plan and the bond authorization requirements. Anything you'd like to add, Micah?
I don't have got questions, let me know.
Hey, Brian, I have a question, or more of just kind of a restating, just to make sure that I'm clear, because there's a lot of technical factors and we've been talking about this for a while. As long as the defined area is approved and essentially the defined area will cover its own costs for the defined area by the defined area, and the defined area is the 153.03 acres. So the current MUD 39, as we knew it, say 6 months ago, the Harper's Landing basically will not be paying for the defined area. The people, the buildings of the defined area will pay for the defined area. They won't pay for the bonds, or the MUD 30, the old MUD 39 won't be paying for the bonds of the 44 million. Okay.
It will have its own. That's the point of creating it, is that area has its own debt service rate in addition to the base debt service rate.
Fantastic.
You may recall when we entered into, it was back in November when we completed the annexation and entered into the construction 10 reimbursement agreement with the land development company. We set the formula for their reimbursement at $1 as the maximum for their reimbursement, to leave some room in case there was a need for, one, just to give y'all comfort that rates weren't getting too high on the cumulative. And then, if the district ever needed to issue additional bonds, you had some capacity to where you could apply. Now, in reality, what's going to happen is they're going to go create a lot of value on this that the rest of the district is going to get the benefit of, that hopefully in time, as we talked about, will allow for the underlying MUD 39 tax rate to drift down maybe at a more accelerated rate than it would have already. So that's right.
Can I ask so there's two parcels, they're all defined area A though, right? So regardless of where. Now, in the future then, because obviously this will all be new infrastructure on these two parcels. So as the infrastructure needs to be replaced in the existing MUD, that bond that we would levy to replace those would be spread across the defined area as well as the existing. That's what I thought. Okay.
one of the
Okay.
benefits. of
Yeah,
having that broadband.
that's what I thought. Okay, I want to make sure I had that right too.
And part of the, when we get to the election, but it's all, like I said, it's all kind of wrapped in together. The tax rate that is being approved for a base maintenance tax is also $1.
Yeah.
So that would be the maintenance tax that could be imposed on this property as well for the infrastructure that's constructed here, but you'll also have your base 39 maintenance tax rate to be able to pay for infrastructure as well.
That's good. I've had some questions from some of the residents, so I just want to make sure that was very clear.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
So does the defined area then, does it, once the bonds have been satisfied, does the defined area essentially disappear? And it just all, I mean, it's already all MUD 39, but as far as then in the future, there would be no difference between the existing MUD and the defined area once that those bonds have been paid back, right? In theory?
I mean, it has its own independent maintenance tax rate. Now, if
Will going forward?
that's what's authorized to be the case. Now, how a board 30-something, 40 years from now, assuming that, the town, there's a lot of ifs. I mean, assuming that the township hasn't incorporated, or if it has, that it didn't dissolve this district. 'Cause,
Yeah.
then you got the whole city of Conroe thing and the strategic
Sure.
partnership agreement, but setting all that stuff aside and say, okay, all this plays out, the bonds are paid off, all that road down the road, the board at that point you wouldn't have a debt service tax rate that would be attributable to the defined area. But you would have a maintenance tax if you so chose to impose it separately on the defined area. But there's a lot of variables between now and then. You also have some authority that if you needed to issue rehab bonds that just serve to restore infrastructure and rehab infrastructure in the defined area, and you didn't use all that 44.8, let's say you used 30 of it, and you had 14 left, and you needed to rehab in that area, you could potentially use some of that remaining authorization for rehabbing the infrastructure that you constructed in the defined area. So a lot of variables there. It's hard to speak in absolutes from that, 30, 40 years down the road.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll still be here.
Well, good Lord, it's on.
Good to know.
All right, so that's the review. There's no action under 14. And then item number 15, if there's no other questions there, is to adopt the order designating the defined area, which is on 153 and change, adopting the designation plan and the taxation plan, which is the dollar that we talked about for the. We have a motion to adopt the order designating defined area A, adopting the designation plan and the taxation plan, and approving the engineer's report, which is that report we discussed.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, now back up to 13, supplemental agenda. Now that we have designated the defined area and going through the plan, we can go to moving forward with calling the election to get that confirmed. So we've got 4 different propositions, and I back up by saying this election will be held jointly with Montgomery County. We've started to work jointly with Montgomery County in the last few elections, and we're going to work jointly with them on this election as well. There will be 4 propositions. The first one is to confirm the creation of the defined area. The second one will be for the 48.8 new money authorization. The third one will be for the refunding authorization. And then the last one will be for the $1, not to exceed $1 maintenance tax authorization. So those are the propositions that we'll have, and procedures for giving notice, the adoption of the order, including the appointment of the agent for the district. And we will, as I said, be going jointly with.
And this will be the residents of the defined area that will be voting for this, correct? Okay.
When's the election?
First Saturday in May, I think it's 6th, May 6th.
And including an appointment of an agent for the district, what, tell
So
us about that?
usually on these elections, I think we usually have Jim. Let's see, we've got it here. We got it listed in the agreements in the order, so. Okay, we've got Peyton, who is the paralegal for the district, designated as the election agent. That's to be able to answer questions and be able to respond to requests for information from the district. We do that pretty standard to have our paralegal listed as the election agent. But in terms of who's the election administrator, who's actually administering the election, who's processing the ballots, et cetera, that's going to be Susie Harvey through Montgomery County Election Central.
How many residents are in the defined area currently?
I don't know yet. We'll get a voter list from the county as we get closer. But the deadline to register to vote is, I think, the end of March or early April. So we won't know for a couple more months.
Okay.
All right, so we do need a motion on the supplemental agenda.
Make a motion, we approve.
We have a second for that.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you much.
That's all I have. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Item number 16 is consider an act on a customer communication and information message. We talked about this last month, that a couple of our MUDs were moving forward with this type of communication to their residents. And so we wanted to at least offer this topic up to all the MUDs. In your packet, there's an example of what MUD 47 has approved. The template was developed in-house by our John Geiger, our public information outreach coordinator. So if you have an interest in putting some bullet points, things that you think are important to share with your residents, we would work with you in getting that put together. We can doing an e-blast, and then if you also wanted to, some of the MUDs are actually doing an insert into the water bill, although it doesn't reach every customer. A lot of the customers get e-bills, but we have a pretty good database for e-blast, so that would be a good option. So something for y'all to consider. The other MUDs, what they have done is appointed one or two of the directors to work with John to kind of brainstorm some things that you would like to highlight, and then for past accomplishments, and then looking forward.
And what's the cost to the MUD to do so?
The cost, really the only cost would be if you choose to do an insert, printing and having that inserted into the water bill. A MUD as small as yours, it's probably $1,000.
Yeah, okay. That's all it would be. Okay. Okay.
How many are doing it in prison?
You know, I think all MUDs prior to you have decided to do it. Yeah.
I mean, given what we've done with our MUD in the last 6 months,
You've got a few
I mean,
things that-
yeah, I think for us especially, could go a long way. Because I think there's not a lot of understanding about that. I know we get a lot of questions, so.
I think it's a great idea. It sounds like we probably need to work like solo with our communications person, or we may have to do this in a meeting so we don't create a quorum accidentally.
That's why we just recommend one or two of you,
Okay.
and that's no violation to the open
Sure.
meetings. You can
Okay.
communicate openly with yourselves and with John Geiger, and then bring it back to your MUD for approval if
Okay.
you'd like to do that at the next month's meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a deadline of when you need to receive the information?
If you decide to do it and would like to have it in next month's packet for review and approval, I think within the next couple of weeks, I would request that you get with John and try to work out what you would recommend for the board to review and approve.
Yeah, I think we move forward with this.
I agree.
I don't see
So
what,
would you and Sean like to be the two
Sure.
that y'all are in the district?
the only thing I would think that Ted would want to be a part of that.
I would
Yeah.
agree. If you don't mind letting Ted take my space, I have a baby. My wife is due in a week or two. And I'd hate to commit and suddenly be unavailable.
And why don't Ted, I'll put Ted's name in the hat. Ted and I,
Okay.
Ted and I will move forward with
Very
this.
good.
Okay. That's right. That's right.
We will look forward to getting that on your agenda next month for final approval.
You said we want to connect with John.
John Geiger, I'll have him reach out to you.
Perfect.
If that's okay.
That's great.
Item 17, the general manager's report, a few things to highlight from our trustee meeting. We, as you know, we've got a new general manager. He's not with us today. He had a prior commitment when he came on board, but you'll see him next month for sure. Merchant service fees, you remember a couple of months ago, one of our trustees, Paul Martin, also part of the audit finance committee, brought to the attention that the merchant service fees is a fairly big number when you add it all up for all the MUDs, and these are what we pay for electronic payments, credit card payments, online payments. And he had some concerns and wanted to look into that. Since then, Maureen has announced that she has been in discussions and actually is looking at recommending a conversion to a new billing software company that would level the playing field on merchant service fees, reduce those, and add a lot of operational benefit to the organization. So that committee has asked to put a pause on this topic until Maureen and our staff have a little more time to review that as an option going forward. So that's where we are with that. Paul Martin, the same trustee, reported at the trustee meeting that our audit is done. Our reserves for the Woodlands Water Agency fall within a range that don't warrant any refunds back to the MUDs. And that's based on a resolution that was passed back in 2018, that if our reserves exceed a certain threshold, we give a rebate back to the MUDs. If it's under that threshold, we ask for money, and we're in a sweet spot this year. So no ask and no refund. There's a couple of letters in your packet regarding the Lone Star Groundwater District and the position 7, which is the Woodlands position that's vacant, still vacant. So just keeping you in the loop on that information. We've got a nice compliment email from a customer on Diane Ayers in our accounting department. And then also at the trustee meeting, it was reported the personnel committee had a meeting with myself and Eric Peterson prior to the trustee meeting, working on what we refer to as special focus projects for the general manager and staff for the coming year. We have a whole host of things that are routine, but each fiscal year we have a number of things that are kind of special and non-routine that we highlight, and that's being finalized. And I think that concludes my report unless you have questions. And I think I've covered the trustee report with most of that. So with that, we'll move on to item 19. And I don't think we have a closed session needed today. So this item 21, discuss any matters for placement on a future agenda other than your customer communication message. If nothing else, then 12:45 will be adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start doing that right now.
So I would really like to